And we're live. Hi,
Yay!
right? This is Heidi Johnson, Sarah O'Connor, and we are doing our week 9 critical dyad. We have some questions to respond to about the experience that we've had this term with our friendship. So the first one says, identify ways that your conversations thus far have been supportive. And then in what ways have you challenged one another? And Sarah and I were actually visiting about this a little while ago and kind of had a good time talking about this. For me, the way that we're supportive of one another is we're both in management at our intern sites, which is kind of can be a huge challenge. It's definitely been a challenge for both of us. And we also we do similar work. Sarah works at the Goodwill and I work at SL Start. So it's both kind of a vocational rehabilitation style of work. We do a little bit different roles, but overall we really understand what the other person is facing. One thing that we've really been super supportive of, we're able to share our beliefs and our feelings, even though we don't always agree on topics. That's been really awesome. We've created a really safe environment. We also connected on Facebook, which may sound kind of silly because that may not mean much to other people, but for us, it's actually really beneficial because, we're a couple of the only people from Washington State, so we don't get to see classmates very often. So seeing each other in pictures on Facebook actually really helps us feel like we're building a true friendship and it's not just some stranger on my computer screen.
Yep, I agree.
And then the challenging. Do you want to start with your story and then I'll do mine?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that a specific example that came to mind for me was a conversation that Heidi and I had where I was talking about a coworker of mine that, and I can't remember if this was this quarter or last quarter. It may have been last quarter, but it was a coworker of mine that I noticed that I was having a little bit of difficulty communicating with, and it was actually me being difficult in the communication. And I was recognizing that there were two distinct times when I had interrupted her. When she was talking to somebody else, I walked up and said, excuse me for a minute, but I, need to tell you this thing, and then I've got to move on, kind of thing. Which is, kind of a director thing to do, right? Like we're running to the next meeting and you sort of get this idea in your head that what you have to say is important. And so everybody has to stop talking and listen to you. And I noticed with this particular person that she was not having it. And I just brought this to Heidi. And the other thing for me is that this is a colleague of mine who's an African-American woman. And I was considering the fact that, being a white person of privilege, that this was me butting into her conversation. And it was just reflecting that kind of the racial aspect of why that was culturally maybe not an appropriate thing to do. And one of the things that Heidi challenged me on was that she listened to that and heard that and then was able to say, yes, and it could also be X, Y, or Z, that, it's not just that is one aspect of a relationship that we have or communication that we have, but that there's more to it. The way that your family raised you. In my family, we interrupt each other and it's just part of what we do. It's not like a rude thing, and so it just allowed me to reflect on the situation in a way that I wasn't kind of pigeonholing, this is why I do this. It was considering the racial aspect, but also she was asking me to consider that there was more to the story. And ultimately, I think it's helped me. I think regardless of why, I stopped interrupting, which was really helpful. But then just considering all the different reasons why that would happen, it was just a helpful way to be challenged. So I appreciated it. And you had an example too, Heidi, right?
Absolutely. And to just lay all the cards on the table and be completely honest, I was scared to death to start our critical dyad this term because of the current political climate. President Trump had just been elected. I believe we may have started even around the same day that people were voting, or even right before. And with all of my might, I did not want to discuss politics because I have become very comfortable with being able to avoid that. It is a place of great privilege, and I fill my day with work and my husband and my children and my cats and school. And I was able to avoid that. I felt like, well, it didn't really affect me. Da da da. Well, the truth is, it really does affect me, and I was actually kind of avoiding it because I just wasn't really. I didn't have my feet totally on the ground about where I stood. And again, I was scared to death that was going to be what we talked about for the next 10 weeks, and that's not what I wanted. All the posts on our classroom site on the discussion post were all political, and I was like, oh my god, what in the world are we going to talk about? And also as a Christian, I was like, well, I didn't vote for the man, but yeah, I still believe in God, and so people a lot of times kind of lump all the Christians together as Trump supporters. People just kind of assume that. So I don't exactly remember what the conversation was that Sarah and I had, but she got to the point where she was able to challenge me in a way that didn't, she didn't offend me, hurt my feelings, and that kind of thing. She was able to stretch me and say, hey, you really do have a place of privilege in your particular church, because I'm in leadership there, and I'm, really good friends with the pastor. So my voice gets heard. And if you don't say anything, you're kind of going along with whatever, they're just pouring down your throat. And that actually gave me the courage and the wherewithal to call out my pastor when because before the election went through, he was telling us how to vote. And that really bothered me, but I hadn't said anything because I was just annoying. But you know what? It really was a huge deal. And by Sarah prompting me to, hey, you know what? You have a voice in your church. You could say something. I did. And he didn't really say very much, but I know that it sunk in. And I'd like to think that it makes a difference in the future. And it's also been really good for me to think about the fact that by not saying anything, I'm not making things better. I'm just on the fence, and I'm not helping anybody. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly not the position that I wanted to be in, but I've gotten tired, to be honest, with a lot of other things going on. So it was easier just to be kind of like, yeah, whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. So I'm really, really appreciative that Sarah pulled me back out of my my slumber, I guess I could call it, my political slumber. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always happy for a debate, so I tend to jump into those things. Okay, let's see. Next question. Do we want to go on?
Sure.
Okay. Are you committed to remaining connected and or building new intentional dyads with others as you move into your next steps post-grad school? So I think we had a good conversation about this one. And I think one of the things that came out for me as we talked was that this is not my go-to in terms of how I work. I like to work kind of alone, and then when I have a question, or I like brainstorming, but it's kind of like I want to do it when I feel like I need it, and I feel like I need it probably a lot less than I actually need it. So being forced to have somebody to check in with on a regular basis is good for me, and it's been really good. It's actually been just a very good thing, a good activity that I'm looking forward to every couple of weeks to kind of debrief with Heidi. And the other thing I was thinking was that one of my projects in my internship is around self-care, and how this is a model that I really want to apply in my own workplace as I work on this internship project, because I think that being a support for a colleague, even if it's just to listen, even if it's not, especially just to listen, if it's a dyad or a small group or a larger support group, but even that idea of having like a regular opportunity to sit down with somebody to chat with them is really important. And I feel like I've found enough value in this that I really want to make that part of my internship and bring that structure to my workplace, because I think people are really hurting and feeling, because in part of the political climate and the kind of work that we do, it's just adds to the burnout. And so having somebody to process with in a way that's safe and structured and has some ground rules, and that you're careful with each other, that I think that's really useful. So yes, I absolutely feel committed. And I also think that Heidi and I mentioned that there's also something beneficial about the fact that as continuing that she and I continue to talk even outside of school, because we don't work in the same place, but we do a similar kind of job. And so there's a way that we can kind of dish about what's going on in our agency without having to worry about, I couldn't do that with a colleague in the same way. If I'm talking to somebody that I don't work with, I'm able to do that in a different way. So that was valuable. What about for you?
To me, it is hugely valuable. I need a sounding board, but I don't have one. I am the director for the West Coast for our side of Washington State. So, like our corporates in Spokane. So there is no one else that's a director over here. We have directors of like the group homes and the children's programs and that kind of thing, but nobody else that does employment. So, if I was going to call and vent, it would be to somebody, 6 hours away. And
Yeah.
I would run the risk of, possibly either getting in trouble or, losing my job, offending the CEO or whatever. So it's awesome having, again, like you said, having somebody in the same kind of field, because we can be like, oh my gosh, can you believe that new legislation where we, and that's stuff that my family certainly doesn't want to listen to me talk about. But I know you do,
Yes.
and I appreciate that. I really like that we've been able to be, honest with one another about our experiences. As you've watched me this last, year, this last several months, I've had a lot of illnesses, and my immune system is compromised from the stress of work and school and being a wife and a mother and the other things that I do. And I've kind of, you were talking about coming to your limit. I'm there, and I'm hitting that burnout stage. So as I listen to you tell me about one of your internship practices about self-care, I think about myself like, oh, I'm the opposite of self-care. I don't self-care. If anything, I run myself around, and I kind of expect that of myself. That's how I was raised, is, you present well and you speak well and you do everything perfectly. And that's just how I think probably a lot of grad students are, at least when we start, because why else would we be motivated to go this far? But so here now, Sarah talks about self-care, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that like within the last few years of school. Maybe it's time that I grab onto that. So yesterday, she's a good friend of mine. She also happens to be a colleague. We were on a 4-hour round trip drive, 2 hours to the client, 2 hours back. And she and I were talking about the fact that we just don't have anything left when we get home, whether it be for our families, our kids, our friends, our partners, whatever. And she said something really insightful. She said, I used to be a person that had hobbies. I used to enjoy doing things. And I thought about that, and I said, so did I. There was actually more to me than work and school and raising a family. I said, that I used to enjoy photography. And she's like, yeah, I used to enjoy, she really likes to go fishing. She used to enjoy fishing. And so she and I made a commitment that this week, when we're on that same 4-hour drive, which originally I kind of didn't want to take, but now I really do. We're going to make a list of the things that we used to do that kind of defined us, or things that we enjoyed doing, and then redo them together as friends. Like, she and I might go for a short hike where I could do some photography, and maybe we would go to a hike and then we would do some fishing, just to kind of remind ourselves that we are, who we are first. It's really,
that's awesome.
It's really easy to get sucked into all these other hats and roles that I've created for myself and that culture and society create. And I miss who I used to be. So I'm super grateful to hear you talk about self-care, because like I said, otherwise I just flat out, I don't think that it would occur to me to do it.
Yep. Good to have that prompt, that reminder.
Right. I also think that
Yeah.
the online friendship that we've developed is probably even more important to students like us that aren't in a classroom. Um, I miss the classroom experience of meeting other young men and women that had new ideas and different, experiences and things like that because the conversations in the classroom were very lively. That's something I really valued about on-campus education.
Hmm.
And so this makes me at least feel like there's someone else, like a human. Because sometimes I wonder, I'm
Yes.
shooting off this assignment into space. I have no idea where it's going to
Yeah.
go. So this makes me feel more grounded with my education.
Yeah, I agree. I think the use of the video and all the Google products to stay in touch with each other has been awesome. The chat, and it doesn't feel like I don't have classmates. I actually feel connected to my classmates.
Right. I think that'll also be pretty cool with when we graduate in the next few months. Maybe we'll have a chance of recognizing each other because otherwise
Yeah.
it's been 3 years and I'm thinking everybody's probably looking a little haggard than we did that first
Yeah.
September. Oh, I know I am.
Yeah. I'm sure. I think I've gained about 15 pounds at least since school started.
Oh my God. And my hair is, I'm like, okay, I put so much money into hair product to cover all these new grays. So I feel you.
Okay, moving on.
Right?
Okay, number 3, how have you held one another accountable to commitments? And what did follow through look like? Do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Again, I think that I actually kind of skipped forward in my conversation a moment ago, so I apologize for getting out of order there. But the holding accountable is I am the opposite of self care. That is what Heidi did.
Mm.
So for you to be talking about that every time we get together, I'm like, this is a really valid thing, and if it's healthy for you and good for you, I want to try it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing that came out for me when we were talking was this idea of kind of a collaborative holding accountable, that we're because we're sort of in a similar situation. I think the thing about challenging each other, and then a couple of times we followed up, like, how did that go? Or did you circle back and talk to that person, and what was the result or whatever? I guess when I first read the question and I read holding accountable, I immediately go to like calling somebody out or something. But there's a way that this model is really about collaboratively. It's like collaborative accountability because you're in it together now in a way that you're not when you're working on your own, kind of thing, and as peers as opposed to like a manager holding you accountable to something. And um, there's a lot of value in that. It's been really valuable for me.
Absolutely. So, last thing is
Yeah.
anything else that we would wish to share about the dyad discussions? Again, I just, for me, it has been incredibly important and critical as an online student to have a friendly, familiar face and to have somebody that doesn't just agree with me all the time because as the director, that's what people do. They just kind of, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, someone has got to have a different opinion out there.
Well, you found your girl, Heidi.
Right, right. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I mean, and like I said, it may not even be anything that I would want to do myself, but I appreciate, our differences, and it's just
Yep.
refreshing.
Yeah, me too. I especially that we have been able to share about our personal selves as well, our spiritual beliefs and our upbringing, and being able to connect about more than just the student self or the professional self, that we're able to connect at those other levels. I think that's really important. It helps us build trust with each other, but it also has taught me ways to broaden my perspective about things, and I've really appreciated that.
Ditto. Well, I think we're gonna sign off. If you're done, I know that
Yeah.
you're 3 hours ahead of me right now because you're over on the East Coast. So it's 11.
Yes, and we're springing forward tonight.
Oh, that's right. Oh gosh, I'm glad you said that. I had been coming into church late. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
All right. Well, take care and travel safely home.
Yeah, thanks. You take care as well.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.